being careful as you approach to worship, as you set foot in the temple, watch your steps. And I thought we had a really, really interesting and impactful discussion. It's one of the sections of Ecclesiastes that all the sections of Ecclesiastes transcend time well, but it's one of the sections of Ecclesiastes that really finds like such direct application. That as you read this in the pages of the Bible, you say, okay, yeah, this needs to be my attitude. This is a warning all of us need to take. And so just the thrust of it being that we ought to really prepare ourselves as we gather to worship and make sure that we're gathering near to listen and to be convicted and to change rather than to speak or be heard or be seen or anything like that. That was a discussion last week. I thought it was really, really, really good. But the rest of this, chapter 5 and into chapter 6, it covers a completely different subject. And it's a subject that maybe feels well-worn in Ecclesiastes, and maybe you think, yeah, it is well-worn in Ecclesiastes. I'm maybe tired of it. But it gets back into the topics, really, of working and money again. And so tonight, ahead of us, we'll find another discussion about these things. Anything about the discussion from last week? Any lingering questions or points that we wanted to bring up before we move into chapter 5, verse 8? I just thought I would ask. Jennifer, you are here. I prayed like you weren't here. I didn't see you in the back there. I'm so sorry. I'm glad you're here. Yes. All right. Well, can I get a volunteer actually to read chapter 5, verse 8, through the end of the chapter, 5:8 through verse 20? Go ahead, Greg.
It says, "If you see in a providence the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter, for the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But this is a gain for a land in every way, a king committed to cultivated fields. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, not he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase to eat them, and what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich would not let him sleep. There is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. And he is a father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. There also is a grievous evil, just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils for the wind? Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness, in much vexation, sickness, and anger. Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him, for that is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them, and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil. This is the gift of God, for he will not much remember the days of his life, because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart."
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. This is actually still in the middle of a section, so we'll have to pick up here again soon, maybe after this question, in fact. But it's a lot to read. I thought I'd break it up. But as you start to think about this idea, this section starts with this idea: why is injustice so common according to chapter 5, verse 8? Do you notice? What is the preacher's observation? Why is injustice so common? Government, right? We have a word for this that kind of sums it up, right? We call it bureaucracy, which doesn't necessarily on its own as a word mean what it means, but the connotation, I feel like, in our culture with the bureaucracy is, oh, this is going to take a long time, or this is going to be really it's going to be all the cogs and everything have to move. It's going to take, it's going to be really messy and burdensome or cumbersome. How does verse 9 round out this observation? Verse 8 says, don't be amazed at this. And also part of this the preacher looks at how common this is, and he kind of says, what's his encouragement for us? Go ahead, Les.
Well, I think this is just kind of repeating what God told the Israelites if they had a king, you know.
Yeah.
He'll take your sons, your daughters, he'll take your land, your food,
Yeah.
your flocks, whatever, you know. This is just saying that the increase from the land is taken by all, and the king himself profits.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of similarities and commonalities. It's a great cross-reference to read all the promises of God as what will happen when they get an earthly king, right? Good. Did you notice what kind of encouragement or what attitude does he tell us to have about this? Hey, there's injustice and oppression. Here's the encouragement. What does he say at the beginning of verse 8? Don't be shocked. That's it. It's like, all right, anything else, preacher? Like, you're going to tell us any other encouragement? But this is helpful, right? It is actually helpful to realize, oh, this is how it is. It's like when Peter says, don't be surprised at the fiery trial among you, as if we weren't supposed to suffer as Christians. And you're like, oh, sometimes I need to be reminded that Christianity comes with pains and struggles like it ought to. And then in verse 9, like Les read and referenced, he rounds it out by saying there's actually a gain involved in this, though. So as unsurprising or as commonplace, as much as we ought to expect that there will be oppression and suffering that comes with government, would it be better to have anarchy? Would a lack of government be better in the preacher's mind? No. And so here's the question, right? As we start to think about this, and you start to say, okay, maybe that was true for him and the injustice he saw, but how do we wrestle with this? Because it is kind of a value qualitative claim that he's making, right? There's a lot of injustice that comes with bureaucracy, and there's one official benefiting from another official, benefiting from another official. Wouldn't it be better sometimes if we just burned it all down and there wasn't any government? I'm not saying this legitimate. I'm saying devil's advocate, a critic might say, right? Any thoughts about that? I mean, is it true that it's better still? Jennifer?
Well, it says in the New Testament also, if you know where that is, that the government don't be surprised when things happen. And it reminds me of a book that a lot of us read a few years ago about the 7 wars that brought us to where we are today. And the first war was in the Bible, that was the beginning of people, that government is supposed to serve God and, it, put forth righteous decisions. And so it's like so far from what anybody has ever, then it's so far, it's exactly like what he says then. It's the same now.
Yeah, this is a common problem, right? Like, this is so common. Good. Les?
I was reading a little bit in a book that I got for Father's Day from my son, and there's a statement in there saying that the founding fathers of this country did not want to do what Europe did with monarchies, and that's why they came up with this kind of government that we have. Mm-hmm. But we've seen over the years that it's the people that still make the government good or bad. And you still see it, kind of thing.
Yeah. This past couple weeks I was listening to a journalist talk about going to Venezuela, and like he was investigating about food shortages and stuff like that, and people had to work 10 hours a day, and they have to wait 3 hours at the grocery store for what was going on there at the time, maybe still going on. And then he said, and then he got taken, because he's a journalist, he got taken to this warehouse that was full of just food. And there were the police officers, like the military, who was keeping order and and they were just bringing all their kind of people in and getting tons of food for their families, And when I think about this, when I thought about this, I was studying for this class, and I was like, wow, it just, like he said, it just is. It's the same, and it's like, don't be surprised. It's tragic, right? I mean, you can't say anything besides that is a tragedy, and it's absurd that it happens. And so the preacher's kind of cool a little bit, like as in cold almost, like, just don't be surprised. It's like, well, how could I not be surprised? This is a horrible thing. And then he says, but honestly, maybe it's still better than not having a government. And this is, I think, the interesting it's these concise 2 statements right next to each other, right? That paint these two, like this picture, but then he says, it's a gain to have a king who cultivates the land, the fields. We have to wrestle with this, right? And as a Christians, we can talk about our responsibilities, Romans 13, 1 Peter 2, these sections, but this isn't really where this is going. This is kind of just talking about this is how the world works. And again, if we're talking to the secularists who only hopes in this world, aren't there so many people, atheistic, agnostic people, who one of their main hopes is that government will make everything better? That we could find utopia, possibly, if the right leaders were in place or the right governmental system was enacted. And the preacher's like, good luck. Because the more people are involved, the more problems are going to be, more mouths there are to feed, and it's just all it's not going to work. So, doesn't mean you can't have government, but you can't really, government's not going to be the solution we all want it to be. And Saul and the kings definitely paint that picture for us in the Bible. Any other comments about this? Ricky?
I was thinking about what the Apostle Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 2. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I exhort you, first of all, that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings and all who are in authority, that we may lead quiet and peaceable lives in godliness and reverence.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. That's great. And so praying that the kings would be blessed or have the wisdom of God or be in touch with God maybe so that we could live lives that would be better. But that is a gift from God, clearly in Paul's mind, and clearly we understand that. Good. Can I get a volunteer to read all of chapter 6 now as well? Because the rest of chapter 5 and into chapter 6 is actually about this idea. And so maybe have this question in mind as the reader reads, but what attitudes and truths are found about our interactions with money in this section? Back to chapter 5, verse 10, and into chapter 6, all of it. Go ahead, Les, if you want to read for us, please. Yes, please.
I have seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on men. God gives a man wealth, possession, and honor, so that he lacks nothing his heart desires. But God does not enable him to enjoy them, and a stranger enjoys them instead. This is meaningless, a grievous evil. A man may have 100 children and live many years, yet no matter how long he lives, if he cannot enjoy his property and does not receive proper burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. It comes without meaning. It departs in darkness, and in darkness its name is shrouded. Though it never saw the sun or knew anything, it has more rest than does that man, even if he lives 1,000 years twice over, but fails to enjoy his prosperity. Do not all go to the same place? All man's efforts are for his mouth, yet his appetite is never satisfied. What advantage has a wise man over a fool? What does the poor man gain by knowing how to conduct himself before others? Better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. This too is meaningless and a chasing after the wind. Whatever exists has already been named, and what man is has been known. No man can contend with one who is stronger than he. The more the words, the less the meaning, and how does that profit anyone? For who knows what is good for a man in life during the few and meaningless days he passes through like a shadow? Who can tell what will happen under the sun after he is gone?
All right, thank you. All right, so in that section that Les read and the section Greg read as well, chapter 5, 10 on, what attitudes and truths are found about our interactions with money? Or our is kind of the royal R here, about people and how people might interact with money. Do you see? There's like a couple of, they're almost vignettes, like kind of little pictures of different people and different lives and different interactions with money. Cass?
You can't enjoy it.
Yeah, so there's one where you can't enjoy it, right? That's chapter 6. He has everything he desires, but in chapter 6, verse 2, God does not give him the power to enjoy them.
Verse 7.
Verse 70, yeah. Yeah, his appetite. And then this, but I think this is actually a different point to some extent. Verse 7 talks about he has everything, what does it say? He has everything, right? The toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is what? The man's toiling for his mouth, and it's like trying to fill an endless pit, right? This is like, again, Ecclesiastes 1 again. The seas keep getting filled, but they never get filled up, and everything kind of has a cycle, and You got to eat every day, apparently, so you just better keep working. So those are kind of two different attitudes, right? One of them is you work and work and work, and for whatever reason, and we'll talk about this in a second, I want to put a pin in this, the person who does all this work can't enjoy any of the good he does, or the work. He can't enjoy any of the bounty or the benefit of it. And then there's another truth with our interactions with money where it's like no matter how much I work, I never get enough, maybe figuratively or definitely literally, or I never have to eat again, or I never need to work again, or I never need another paycheck in the bank, right? Because there's monthly bills and I need food, all this, whatever. And so this is another thing. This is just an obvious truth, but it's an important one to see to make his overall point. Any other kind of truths or attitudes that he paints here? Go ahead, Les.
I see here that if we accept everything we have as being a gift from God, we should be happy.
Yeah. Yeah, that is part of this, right? But it is interesting because, and this we'll talk about this when we get to this looking at this section more closely in verses 1, 2, and 3 of chapter 6. But he actually says in chapter 2, verse 6, that there's a man that God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so he lacks nothing of all he desires, yet God does not give him the power to enjoy them. And that's a really interesting conundrum that I want to think about, because I know your point overall is a wise point for Christians to take to heart, that with what we have, we ought to enjoy it and live to enjoy it. And in fact, the preacher's made that point many times in this book already. But this one has a little different tone to it, right? Did I have another, see another hand over here? No? Y'all look around, no one sees it. Kathy?
Never satisfied
Yeah.
in making enough money.
Yeah. Yeah, you're never satisfied with making enough money. I remember being young and hearing sermons where there was like, and I think it was Pew Research or something, I can't remember. I didn't think about it until just now, where it says like, at the time it was like, your happiness increases with every $10,000 more you make a year to a point, and then it either plateaus or gets less happy. Right, where it's like, if you're making $70,000, you get a lot happier making $80,000. Then $90,000, you're a lot happier. Then $100,000, you're really happy. Then $110,000, you're just as happy. $120,000, you're like just as happy. $130,000, it's like maybe it's actually a little less happy. I'm referencing statistics that were told to me in a sermon more than 10 years ago. So major grain of salt with that. Do your own research on that. But also, we know that's true, don't we? I mean, it's not like I need the statistics to back it up. We know that's true. And that's the point you're making, is that there's never a point where it's like, man, if I made this much money, I would never need a raise ever again. I would be set for the rest of my life. Tell your boss that, right? That's a good idea to tell your boss. Go ahead, Pat.
Following that thought, that's why the lottery tickets sell so well.
Yeah.
People want to win the lottery so they never have to work again.
Yeah.
Never worry about money again.
Yeah.
But if you follow lottery winners, they're just as poor or poorer.
Yeah. 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 And so we're getting to this observation. He's the heart of it is this idea of what is our relationship with money, what ought it to be, and what's the common ones. But there's actually even more specific ones. If you look at chapter 5, verse 13, there's a grievous evil. This is a grievous evil. It's not just an evil. It's not just grievous. It's both. It's a horrible thing that the preacher has seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt. And what happened when he kept those riches? Look at verse 14. What happened? He lost them, right? I mean, there was a venture, and he probably got rich through other ventures, but this one didn't work out. And then what happened after that in the second half of verse 14? What else is true in this man's life? He had a son, and what could he give him? Nothing. I mean, most of his life, it seems, probably to this point in this short little story, this guy had a lot, and he says, son, you're going to take all this at one point. Everything the son touches is going to be yours. And then the next venture comes along, it's like, oh, by the way, son, everything that I had is gone. Now you have nothing. It's like, oh, that was my whole life, right? And he says in verse 15, he paints this picture, as he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, taking nothing for the toil that he may carry away in his hand. This is a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils under the sun? Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness and much vexation and sickness and anger. Do you see the point he's making? This guy didn't just didn't just have an inheritance. Like the idea is this guy worked really, really, really hard. And he earned the money he had. And then one time he made a bad investment, which sometimes, maybe there's nefarious, this is just a general story, but it seems like it just happens. Sometimes it just doesn't go your way. He lost everything. Now he has nothing. How does that guy think about all the work he did for all those decades of his life? How can you think about that besides what a grievous evil, what a horrible thing. And all he does now is when he gets his food, he eats in sickness and anger and darkness. listen, all these different little vignettes and pictures about people's interactions with money is like the little short stories about things that can happen that sometimes are out of our control. A depression hits, the Dust Bowl, right? Well, all these things. There's times where just people who were honest, hard workers who had things and stuff and money had nothing. And is there a reason for it? Can we say, well, this is the reason, they deserved it? I think part of the point the preacher's making is saying this is how it is. And again, all of the book of Ecclesiastes is pointing that if this world is all you have, money's not all that, right? You had your hand up, Sue.
I did. It made me think of, and I don't know where this is, I'm sorry, but the man who had so much grain that he had to build extra barns.
Yeah.
And he just thought he was so rich, and the next day he died.
Yeah.
And, when you leave this earth, you have nothing.
Yeah.
And I think if people really trust that and believe that, they're happy with what they have.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. That's true. I think it's in Luke 11 or 12, somewhere in there. I think you're, yeah. Yeah, I know. That is a great cross-reference. Do you guys see any other attitudes or truths about money or interactions with it in these sections? Because there's more. There actually is more in here about a different way we can look at money or things or situations that might arise. What do you think it means in verse 8 of chapter 6, rather verse 9, when it says, better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. And the context is talking about poor and rich, right? Again, like all this is. What does that mean? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. Yeah. If you can see it, that's a lot better than having an appetite that's constantly wandering. And this is a point, an addition to the point we already made, but I think it is helpful to think about this, right? Even if it's just nothing, that's better than what you want that you don't have, right? Than the covetous or in the envy or the jealousy or all that can come in with that. Good. Anything else about this, like the general various attitudes or truths about our interactions with money in this section? Les, you had your hand up a second ago. And then Maria, we'll get you too.
Well, Pat brought up the idea of the lottery. And in this country, lotteries came into being very popular about 50 years ago, maybe 45, 50 years ago. And since that time, we've been able to see that all the big money winners, very few have been able to keep their money, and they've gone broke really quick. It comes and it goes, and you shouldn't expect to get something for nothing in that regard.
Sure. Yeah.
But people put their money to it. I worked in a company one time where someone won a lot of money in the lottery twice in 1 month.
Wow.
When I say a lot of money, it was $5,000 or $10,000 winnings kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that happened really, and what happened to it? It didn't last very long.
Yeah, vanished. Yeah.
That was really early, like the 1980s or something.
Okay.
That person did that.
Wow. Yeah, super. Yeah, that is common, right? That's the way it goes. Maria?
Sure. In Matthew 6, in verse 24, it says, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth."
Yeah, that's such a great cross-reference. Thanks for reading that. Yeah, because that's what we're talking about, right? That there's all these different ways we might want to serve wealth, or we think that wealth will serve us, right? And so we set our hearts on it, and then it ends up undoing us, right? So in the middle of all this, how does the preacher encourage us to think and to live at the end of chapter 5, verses 18 through 20? And this, Les made a point similar to this a little bit earlier in the class, but look at these verses, 18 through 20. How does the preacher encourage us to think and live in these verses? Go, Kathy?
To enjoy what we have.
Yeah, to enjoy what we have now, right? This, like the sight of the eyes is better than the wandering of the appetite. He's kind of making this point repeatedly. And to eat and drink and find enjoyment and not just in the process, not just in the bounty of it, right? Or the results of it. But he actually says in verse 18, find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Verse 19, everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. So where does this gift come from that we can enjoy working and enjoy the fruit of that work?
Where all gifts come from.
From God, yeah, from where all gifts come from. And so this is, again, like, we have to ponder these kind of insertions that where God comes into the picture as a preacher preaches, or as he speaks about God in this book that is largely focused on secular kind of ideas, right? And ideas bounded by the horizons of this world, life under the sun, as he talks about. And it's like, even though as a preacher makes these observations, his worldview, his spiritual, godly worldview, can't help but break in upon it to some extent, it seems like. And he says, look, this is what I've seen, and some people, but even in that, like, if it's just the money that you have, even if it is a gift from God to enjoy it, like, there's still questions. Well, why does this person get to enjoy it from the gift of God and not the other? Or if money is all you have and some people can enjoy it and some people can't, then what gives? Because the next verse is like the perfect complement to it. We already talked about this in some senses, right? But where it says, there's an evil. In the very next verse, I've seen under the sun. It lies heavy on mankind, a man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him the power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is a vanity. It's a grievous evil. Can you think of circumstances where this kind of general idea might be literally true? A man has everything. He's been given everything, but someone else gets to enjoy it, not him. What is he talking about here? Jennifer?
Well, I thought that might coincide with Proverbs 13:22, where it says, a sinner's wealth will be saved for righteous people. And I've seen that in my family, where you're like, people accrue money and then they're not happy. It's very sad.
Yeah.
But then it's good because their money goes to more righteous thinking people.
Yeah. There's interesting ideas involved in this, right? Where it's like, because even that, like, I think it is true. It's in Proverbs. I think there's some of that in here as well. And it's like, that's still a hard idea sometimes, right? It's like, you look around, it's like, that's tough for those people, right? But it's part of their own actions, or as a result of their own actions.
I think would you say that this chapter is talking about people that aren't following God?
I think the target of this whole book is people who don't have, it's like the secular, again, it's talking about people about life under the sun as if God isn't involved in it. If the people, if that's the only way you view the world, then that is, I think, what this is speaking to.
The person who's bitter and in the dark, and
Yeah.
I mean, we as Christians shouldn't be bitter no matter what happens to us.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that this is the exact point he's getting at, right? Where, listen, as he's talking about all these different things with money, where it's like someone has all this stuff and God gives them the gift of being able to enjoy it. And really that's the the point, I think, of God being involved in it in some senses, as he talks about from the secular worldview, is that there is an invisible force involved with even whether or not you can enjoy the wealth you have. Two people could have the very same amount, the very same gifts, very same setup, and one enjoys it and the other does not. And I think as the preacher views this, his only explanation says, well, God's given him the gift and God hasn't given him the gift. And I don't even think it's necessarily implied in how he talks about it that one's righteous and one isn't. And hear me out when I say this. As we look at it, we can say that Proverbs would say that, and so there is wisdom that says that. I'm not saying it's not true. But I think the point he's making is saying, if that is the difference, that there is an invisible force, that two people have the same stuff, the same setup, and one enjoys it and one doesn't, then what's the point of having it in the first place? That's the point he's making. He's not really talking about, he is talking about the money, but he's rather, I think, making the larger point that if this is how wealth and money and possessions and toil, even the work we do, if even the work we do, I might not get to enjoy it, why am I doing it? Now, maybe I do enjoy it. I hope you do, right? That's a gift from God. But you see, I think the grander point he's making in all of this, that whatever circumstances we find ourselves in, if this is all we have, then it's an absurd kind of existence. And that's the word vanity, right? It's empty, or it's, Bless's translation said meaningless. And all these words kind of hit on this picture. It's like smoke. You can't grab onto it. And when you try to, it just evaporates. Cass?
I don't want to speak for him because obviously I don't know whether he enjoys his wealth or not, but Elon Musk just welcomed baby number and he constantly looks for the new thing, the new thing, the new thing. And
Yeah.
I'm like, he's one of the richest people in the entire world, and he does not enjoy his bubble.
Well, look at verse 3, but to your point, right? Ecclesiastes 6:3. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial. How can I say the word? Burial. Muriel is a name. Burial is a word. I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. For it comes in vanity and goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. That's a really brutal way to make a point, isn't it? Oh, better a stillborn child than this guy who lives 100 years. In your example, possibly an example of our life. Elon Musk, who's searching maybe. Who knows? We can't know his life, right? But if we think about what the picture we're painting here, what picture is painted here by the preacher, this man who has all this wealth but cannot enjoy it for whatever reason. Maybe he doesn't have the heart kind of structures to enjoy it. This might also talk about literal people where like you're under the thumb of other people, right? There are people who are indentured servants or who are slaves who literally worked and didn't get to enjoy any of the fruit of their labor, right? There are literal existences where it's not a heart problem, but it is a physical interaction with the world. Powers that be have put you under their thumb. The Jewish people in the first century would say, we're under the thumb of Rome. We're not enjoying all the bounty of our toil. And so whether it be kind of the internal problems or the external problems that are real too, this is a place that people find themselves in. And the preacher's point with all this is that if you have all of this and if you work your whole life so hard and you never get to enjoy any of it, you don't even enjoy the work you do, then you're better off being stillborn if that's all we have. If all we have is this and the work and the wealth and the prosperity and the benefits from it, and you don't even get to enjoy it, then better not to be born. Better to have died on the way, which is a horrible thing to say. But it's true, actually. If this world is all we have, and if we're bounded by the horizon of this world, and his point, you can't really argue with it, because that would be better. Here, this is where I think a helpful quote from this commentary right here by Derek Kidner might help us. He says, we may protest life is not by any means as black as this for most people. To this, Koheleth, or the preacher as we've been calling him, might reply, first, that he is speaking here of some people, not all. And secondly, that if we ourselves are not concerned about meanings and values, somebody should be. And who are we to opt out of that responsibility? Once more, he is inviting us to think, and in particular to think through the secularist's position. If this life is all, and offers to some people frustration rather than fulfillment, leaving them nothing to pass on to those who depend on them, if further all alike are waiting for their turn to be deleted, then some indeed can envy the stillborn, whose turn comes first. Job and Jeremiah at times would have fervently agreed. And if we disagree with that mood of those two men, it is because we judge their lives by values that transcend death and outweigh a lifetime's pains and pleasures, criteria that the secularist cannot logically use. This is so well put. I think it's just like exactly the point that's getting made here. Do you see what he's saying? If we're like, hey, Ben, this is too depressing, stop looking at this. First of all, this isn't true of all people, which isn't really that helpful. But second of all, the point is, listen, maybe this isn't your life, or maybe this isn't even life for most people, or most people who have ever lived in the percentages of the grand scheme of all humanity. But a few people suffering this way is enough, isn't it? And if I don't care about that, then what does that say about me? Why do I get to be the one who coolly says, oh, that's your problem, not my problem. No problem, Bob, for me. Tough for you. We can't look at this and say, well, I'm glad that's not me, and just kind of be done with it, right? We should say, if it's not us, I'm glad it's not me, thank you, God. I'm not saying we shouldn't be thankful, but we have to wrestle with this. And the point that he makes there at the end, I think, is the point of this whole book, which is the value of this for Christians today is for us to understand that the world around us, the people who live in this life as if there is no God, the atheist, the agnostic, otherwise, this is the worldview that they have. And to understand this is the ends of it, if we really appreciate it, helps us maybe to see what's at stake, what's going on. And I just think the way you put this is really, really helpful. Anyway, any other thoughts or comments about that idea? Go ahead, Rick.
So when we've seen individuals that have had a lot of money, and their attitudes towards God and towards their fellow man. And then those that have money and the fellow man and God. And the two is very different because one, they put all their trust in God and they get more. The more they give, the more they do. So you watch Elon Musk and you watch Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett gives away a lot of money, and he's always got a smile on his face, and he's not looking for the next best thing. And I'm not advocating either one of these guys, but you look at the two, I'd go with Warren Buffett before I would go with Elon Musk.
Sure.
Because one guy knows that the poor, and he gives a lot to the poor and stuff and things, and
Yeah.
not to say that they could give more, but that's not the point. The point is there's godly people that have wealth, and they do a lot of good. I mean, a lot of good.
Yeah. Amen.
And then there's those that not so much.
Yeah.
And they get a little bit, and and they can't sleep. They can't. There's nothing they can do to find any peace.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for us as Christians, as we engage with this chapter, even though this isn't the large point that he's making, I think it is helpful for us to think along the lines that you and Les have been saying a lot in this class tonight. That as we think about this, there is wisdom in that he gives us, these little tidbits in here, these morsels of wisdom along the way. Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. You'll never be satisfied with things and food and money. We just won't. And knowing that is very helpful, right? And so one of the great conclusions for all of us is that we ought to really be real careful with our attitudes surrounding money and knowing that you can't take it with you, right? Naked as you came, naked shall you go. And so if there's other points, I want to get to them. But I want to ask this last question. Make sure we spend some time on this last question because it's the conclusion of this section. How does the preacher end this section on money in chapter 6, verses 10 through 12? How does he end it? What's the kind of final conclusion? You see it? What does it say here in verses 10, 11, and 12? Oh, go ahead, Cass, sorry.
So, verse 10 says, he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. I would say that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he without God, because David killed Goliath, and the Israelites routed the Canaanites and the Amalekites and everything.
Yeah.
But for a secular position, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Like, you can't fight against someone with more power or more armies or whatever without God.
Yeah.
Because God determines all things.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the largest point he's making here is that you can't change any of these things. Like, we might look around and part of this, with all of this, the oppression of the governmental systems, within all the different, this person is given everything to enjoy, and why can't they enjoy it? Well, it's like you can't change that for them, and you might not even be able to change it for yourself. We said there might be attitudes we could have that would change it. That's fair. For some people, you can't change it at all. What else does he say here in this conclusion? I think connected to Cass's point in verse 11, the more words, the more vanity, and what is the advantage to man, right? We try and go on and talk a lot about this. And we say we write all these, tomes and books, and there's journalists, financial economists and all this, and the work is valuable. I'm not saying it's not, but sometimes it doesn't change a lot of the world around us. And their solutions or their theories or whatever don't actually change the reality. And then he ends in verse 12. I don't think he has an answer in mind. I think he's literally asking, this is the question that it leaves us with. For who knows what is good for a man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? For who can tell man what will be after him under the sun? If we're living life bounded by the horizons of this world, by life, by birth and death, under the sun, life as we see it, the secularist view, and you tell someone money doesn't matter that much, you can't really say that. You can't. It is actually, factually wrong. And it's kind of morally repugnant a little bit, honestly. But hey, money doesn't matter that much. It's like, hey, you can say that maybe. It matters a lot to me because I'm getting just enough to scrape by. I'm budgeting, I'm pinching every penny, and I still can barely make it. And if this world is all there is, that person's right. And then if we're looking at this and the preacher's saying, money's not all that. And the question then comes, well, then what is there? What should I, what can I have? What do I find? Where is there good to be found in my life? if I can't even enjoy the toil and the benefits of the toil and the money that I'm making, if I can't enjoy the gifts that come from it, if I can't even enjoy the work, if I can't enjoy any of this, then what should I do even? Do I just give up? That's kind of the question he's asking. This is the existential question for the secularist that the preacher is pointing you to. He's kind of pushing you towards this precipice and saying, hey, have you thought about this? Who can tell what's going to be after him, right? Again, it's a similar question. This leaves somebody, it's kind of, this is another quote from the same commentary, it's a double bewilderment. He's left with no absolute values to live for, what's good, and not even any practical certainties, what will be, to plan for. No moral principles and no planning foundations. What does this person have? So why is this the conclusion of all this? What's the help in it? Is there direction found in it? Is it just really bleak and depressing? Why does he end it like this? Because this is the end of this section. The next section is going to be very different, chapter 7, verse 1. Any thoughts? Mike?
That fear of eternity that God's put in all man puts you here to say these few days, the shortness of life, but there's this eternity that in the back of my mind I have this fear of. So I think that's the opening of the door.
Yeah.
Just to know mankind and that fear that is in all people, whether they want to admit it at any time in their life. When you work with other people that don't think about eternity, don't want to tell you about it, but truly it is in their heart.
Yeah. You're right. This is what the preacher's doing. I think he's doing it masterfully and doing it. He's both being very not subtle and subtle at the same time. But he's leading to this question. These are questions that a lot of us just would rather put the blinders on towards. And a lot of people would say, I don't want to think about this, preacher. I'd rather you didn't bring this up. But that's the very point he's bringing us to. I think to your point, Mike, that in chapter 3 he says he set eternity in our hearts. There is a gnawing at the center of the human heart. And so many people have found many fanciful, and he actually says this early in the book. Remember, he says, men have sought out many schemes. Actually, that's the end of chapter 7, he says that. Men have sought out many schemes. We try our best to kind of fill the hole with dirt, and it's just empty at the bottom. And it's just never getting there. And this is one of these questions that so many people would rather not turn over if they have. They've filled it with a sufficient answer for them, but the preacher's saying there's no sufficient answer as the world is bounded. And this is kind of, I think, one of the conclusion points he makes. It's a milestone for his argument. He'll come back to stuff like this. But this shows you the overall direction of what he's aiming at in this book. And this, again, it's not just for people who claim and the title, the name atheist or agnostic, but it is for some Christians who will claim Jesus for just simply moralistic reasons. Well, he's a great teacher. Or Jesus makes my life better, or I like being a part of the church because it feels nice, or I should be a part of the church because I know it's right. This actually challenges each of us, even people like that, or maybe some of us in this class even, because if it isn't all about God, where this chapter started in chapter 5, with how we worship, what are we doing when we worship? If it actually isn't all about him, then it's pointless. It's meaningless. It's empty. It's absurd. It's wrong, practically. And so all of this really pushes us to think and to really be humble in the scope of our existence and to think beyond the bounds of just what this world has to offer, which so many of you have made comments along those lines. So any other final thoughts or questions? All right, next week we'll pick up at chapter 7. Omri, what do you have for us?
Yeah. In my notes, it says, appreciate what you already have, not what you don't.
Yeah. And that's one of the points to make, right? That's like one of the great applications. Appreciate what you already have, not what you don't. Good. I appreciate you all. Here's the questions for next week. Come and grab one. We'll go through all of chapter 7 next week.